Welcome back to our series of videos on learning Greek. And at the moment we're in the middle of looking at prepositions. In the last video we introduced you to the idea of prepositions and learnt some very simple Greek prepositions. I reminded you that prepositions are small words normally that link nouns, that tell you about where a noun will be, where a noun is, or the time sequencing of nouns, or personal pronouns, of course. And we looked at a few examples in Greek. So let's just remind you of the words that we learnt in Greek. We learnt eis and pros. We learnt apo and ek, and we learnt en. And obviously these are grouped for a variety of reasons, both the logical way in which they relate together, but also some of the Greek grammatical consequences. So eis and pros both mean two. Strictly speaking, in terms of what you're told in the grammar, eis means into, pros means towards. But I need to stress right from the word go that languages are never quite as precise as that, and there are all sorts of variations and changes. But in terms of learning the words, it's probably good to learn them on that basis, and then you can discover the nuances as you use them and as you read the New Testament or indeed any other Greek literature. And similar, just as eis is into and pros is towards, ek in fact is the equivalent of the opposite of eis. So ek is out of, out from, and apo is away from. And then en means in. So they are kind of logically grouped, those things. But we also found that eis and pros always take the accusative. Whatever it is that you're going to, or into, or towards is in the accusative. Whatever you're coming away from or out of is in the genitive, and whatever you are in is in the dative. So we discovered that different prepositions take different cases. Now I want to kind of emphasize a little bit more the sort of caveat about meanings. Some prepositions, I think you could probably say pretty much all prepositions can have more than one meaning. They have a variety of meanings. Now, the whole idea of grammar in a way is looking at how we use a language and trying to find a structure within that. And sometimes it's a little artificial. Sometimes the grammar is more imposed by the people creating the grammar than it really being there. So, you have to make your decision. But there are a certain amount of groupings that we can do with prepositions. So think about the preposition in, for example, in English. We might say, for example, he is sitting in the railway station. And that speaks of location. So, and that's pretty obvious. I think that would be a natural understanding of the preposition in. It's what you're in. But it also can refer to time. He'll get up in 10 minutes. So there's a time. And that's not quite so obvious. If you were a non-English speaker learning the language, being in the railway station is easy enough, but getting up in 10 minutes, you may well find that in another language there are different prepositions for those two expressions. And then also we've got other uses where they don't fit into that neat little category of location or time. So he appears to be in pain. Now, the classification that the grammarians give is that it's about feelings and sensations and experiences. He appears to be in pain. It's not really negative. You can be in love. You can be in hope, in expectation, in anticipation, in agony, all sorts of things, feelings, expressions. But you can also be, so there's the feelings, yes. But another use of the word in could be used, like in the sentence, he's an expert in Roman history. And there it's an activity. Often, in fact, when you use the ing part of verbs, you use in. He's an expert in running. You can use other prepositions relating to these as well. He's good at running. He's a habit of running. But he has a dab hand in thinking about things like this. Notice the ing. I chose Roman history as something that was, if you like, a clear noun. And then, in fact, we've got some other uses of the in that really are difficult to classify. He's got a new job, but he's settling in nicely. So, although Greek is difficult, don't give in. We might probably say don't give up rather than don't give in, but you can give in to a temptation. Now, notice in these cases, really they are part of the verb. To settle in is to become accustomed, to be comfortable. To give in is to abandon yourself to some habit or experience. So we don't use the kind of long verbs. We like to use these verbs with prepositions attached to them. And the in really just tells us what specific verb it is. So you've gone a long way from this idea of one thing being inside another. And it's difficult to teach those. Let's have a look at a different preposition and perhaps also a different order of difficulty in terms of understanding those verbs as well. Those prepositions. Sorry, something happened in my prompt and I got carried away. So let's have a look at something, another preposition, and that's the preposition of. And I've said that some differences are hard to describe. Sorry, not of, for. I'm heading for Athens. That's easy enough. It's towards. Process towards. But I'm all for Greek. Now, you know, that's not location. It's not time. I suppose you might say it's experience or emotion or something. I'll be learning it for years to come. So there's duration. So for in Athens is some kind of location. For years to come is some kind of duration. But much harder to kind of put your finger on. I'd never change Greek for Latin. Some sort of interchange going on there. Duff is good for learning Greek. Now how you classify these, I'm not really sure. Now why am I going through all this? Why am I saying this? Because the same kinds of difficulties exist in Greek. And you need to be aware of that. So what you're being told in the Greek grammars, in a sense, is a simplified version of the whole story. But you've got to start somewhere. And just as with English, you would be taught kind of certain standard meanings of the word for. You would use them, and then as you became more comfortable with English, as you learnt more English, you would experience these different uses, and you would begin to absorb that difference. You would probably learn it in a fairly unofficial way rather than learning the meaning in all those different cases. Same will be true as with Greek. So in Greek, you'll be learning prepositions. You'll learn the simple, basic meanings of prepositions, but be prepared for the fact that actually they are a lot more complex. But one of the things that characterizes Greek as opposed to English is that key differences between prepositions are marked by differences in case. Now, we've already seen that different prepositions take a different case. So the ace takes the accusative, the apot takes the genitive. But in fact, we also have some prepositions where they can take different meanings depending on the case that follows. So they don't have one case, they have two. And let me give you an example. Dia. Dia has two fundamental meanings. And again, let me emphasize, it's obviously a lot more complex than this, but in terms of the dictionary meanings, in terms of what you will learn, it has two meanings. Because of and by means of, although we'll simplify by means of to say through. So it gives the two examples here. In Matthew chapter 6 verse 25, dia tuto lego humin. Because of this thing, literally, because of this, I say to you. I've tried to choose passages from the Bible because it's nice to be able to use the Bible a little bit. But as before, if there are words you don't understand, you've not come across humin before, don't worry about it. Okay, it's just the general thrust of the quote that I want to get across. Dia tuto. Tuto, in fact, is accusative. It's accusative neuter. And it's because of this thing. Thing is implied, so because of this, we would say, I say to you. But then you've got gegraptai dia tu prophetu. It was written by means of the prophet. So we would simply say by the prophet, through the prophet, possibly. It was written by means of the prophet, not because of the prophet. It wasn't written because the prophet was there. It was the way that God spoke, but it was written by means of someone else. Let's take another example. Let's have a look at kata. Again, the standard meanings that you'll be given are, if it has the accusative, it takes the accusative, it means according to. If it takes the genitive, it will be against. Excuse my awful Greek pronunciation. I'm sure any true Greek speaker will be horrified, but I do my best. Kata de ta erga auton me poete. The me poete really comes first, and it's a command. Do not act, do not do. According to kata, ta erga auton, their works or their deeds. So do not act according to their works or their deeds. Don't do what they do, is what he's actually saying. Or again, the second quote, engon gutzon kata tu oiko despoto. They grumbled. Gongudzo. They grumbled against the landowner. That's a really difficult one, and there were words that we've not come across. I hardly know them. Don't use that very often, but they grumbled against the landowner. It's genitive, tu oikodespoto. I've got a feeling that should be oikodespotu, but I may be wrong. I've probably missed a letter out there in copying it across to the file. You can check it in your Greek New Testament. Okay, so you get the point. The preposition, it's the same preposition, two completely different meanings depending on the case that they take. Okay? And in fact, Duff gives us a complete list. It's not complete, it's not all of these by any means, but his list is here. I'm not going to spend any time on that because you can look in the book and you can go through them. But you can see that again, with each one, meta is the accusative is after, with the genitive is with peri, around and about. Some of them, the differences are quite marginal, to be honest. And it's the grammarian who's kind of trying to make a distinction. But you'll see the list in Duff's section 4.2.3. Now, it is fairly logical, and you may be expecting this, since we've had some prepositions that seem to take just one case, and we've got these prepositions that take two cases. There are some, yeah, you've guessed it, that take three cases. Okay? There's only two here in the list. The others are the two case ones. I'm not quite sure why I stuck those in a second time. But you've got two, para and epi. Now, actually, the difference in meaning in para, for example, is very subtle sometimes. In theory, it's really a bit like the ace, ek, en distinction. Para, the accusative, is to beside. The genitive is from beside, and the dative is there beside. But, you know, so sometimes the difference is not as grand as they're making out, but that's essentially there. And certainly the important thing is that you will read sentences, and sometimes para will have accusative, sometimes para will have genitive, sometimes para will have dative, and it's worth trying to see the difference. Sometimes that difference is significant, so you need to be careful about that. You'll get Duff's list in section 4.2.2. For some reason he dealt with the 3 case prepositions before the 2 case prepositions. It doesn't really matter. He also gives you a few extra 1 case prepositions in section 4.2.4, but we won't spend time on that. Okay, so that's the prepositions. And that's, in a sense, what you need to know about prepositions. The 3 types of prepositions, you will learn the list, you'll go through the vocab, you need to learn them with their various meanings. But there's an important element of what happens with these once they're used, and that's called elision. Now, we get this in English. I can't understand. Now, that means I cannot understand, but we very rarely say I cannot. We usually say can't. We've run part of the word together, so we've got a kind of elision within the word. Sometimes the same thing happens across the word, and we chop a little bit of the word off when we're speaking. Sometimes it's accepted by grammar, like can't. Can't is recognised. Other times we just do it. And that's elision, and every language has elision, and it's part of the nice sound when we're speaking the language kind of faster. So let me give you an example again from one of the prepositions we learned right at the beginning, apo. When it's followed by a vowel with a smooth breathing, we simply drop the vowel. So apo becomes ap. So let me give you an example. Αποχωρείτε απ' μου. Go away from me. Okay, απ' μου. Not από emu, but απ' μου. Now, I need to emphasize that probably they spoke the pi was an unaspirated P. We find it really difficult to say that. If you put your hand in front of your mouth and you say spare, you can feel a little puff of wind when you get the P. Spare. Sorry, pair. If you say pair. Spare, you don't feel it. Pair, you get a puff of wind. Spare, you get a little bit of wind, but not so much. Now try saying pair, but try and say spare, but not saying the s. So you go bear. Now you're doing the same word as pair, but without the aspiration on the P. We think that probably the pi in Greek was like that. And the phi was not a f sound, but it was an aspirated P. So it was the difference between the unaspirated pair and the aspirated pair. Now, we find it difficult. I find it difficult to say, certainly difficult to hear, but that's going to become important. But let's have another example of this apo, first of all. So it wouldn't be aparches, it would be aparches, almost like abarches. So aparches metemu este. From the beginning, you are with me. I've translated you are because literally that's the case, but it was obviously, we would say you've been with me. From the beginning, aparches. Notice that you've got another preposition there, meta, and that the same thing has happened there. We've lost the vowel. Okay, I've actually been putting these little apostrophes in. I've forgotten to put it in after the met, but actually the Greek text that I've taken it from doesn't bother with them, and they would have been later. So that's perfectly fair. So that's the apo with a smooth breathing. But obviously something else happens with a rough breathing, and because it's unaspirated, but a rough breathing is aspirated, the pi turns into the aspirated version, which is the phi. So in fact, apo plus a rough breathing vowel not only loses the O, but it aspirates the P, and it becomes af or app. Okay, so here, ho afertu lalon ten doxan ten idian zete. You break it into the two halves there. Ho is just he, or he who. Aferten, from himself. That's out of his own resources, out of his own understanding. Lalon is speaking. So he who speaks from himself, literally. Zete seeks. Ten doxen ten idian, his own glory. Ten idian is a kind of a strange word which means one's own. So his own glory. So he who speaks from himself seeks his own glory. The important thing there is that the apo has become af or ap, depending on whether you manage the unaspirated pi in the first place. Okay, so that was quite convoluted, but I hope you got the idea. So we find that of all the prepositions, we get this elision happening, or nearly all the prepositions, we get the elision happening. And many prepositions that end in a vowel drop the ending when the next word starts with a vowel. So let me give you yet another example, really just as an example. The preposition is para. So tauta lelaleka humin parumin menon. I've said these things to you. Tauta lelaleka humin. I've said these things to you. The laleka is a perfect tense. It says these things I have said to you. These things I've said to you. Parumin, alongside you. Menon, I remain. So these things I've said to you while I remain alongside you. Now you would say with you. I've kind of emphasized the preposition to get the overall sense from it. Okay, but I emphasize it doesn't always happen. If I take another preposition, epi, Matthew 9:16 says epi himatio palao, on an old garment. This is, you don't put new patches on an old garment. Epi himatio palao. And you've got the two vowels together. They've not, so you haven't lost the E in epi. It doesn't say epimatio. Okay, so sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And I'm afraid that's just real life. And some also modify the consonant, like apo. So if we take meta, sometimes that will become met, but in fact, if it's a rough breathing, it can become meth. So here, echontes metheauton kofus, and then there was a list of other things. So bringing with them metheauton, people unable to talk, and then it was walk and other illnesses. This is in Duff, but he does go through it quite quickly. But he does mention one particular preposition, which is ek, because although it doesn't end in the vowel, it has a similar sort of change before a vowel, any vowel, and the ek becomes x. So a nice quote is exai gupto ekalesa ton huyon mu. Out of Egypt I called my son. Exai guptu, out of Egypt. Okay, now you can have a look at the book. And not only that, but we've covered now half the chapter. You're now in a position to do the practice in section 4.2 and the halfway practice. So I do recommend that before you move on to the next video, you do the practice. But just to summarize, there is a chart that seems fairly common. It exists in a variety of places. It can be slightly different. It's quite busy, but if you spend some time looking at it and looking at the meanings of the different prepositions in Duff, if you've got a visual memory in particular, you might find it quite helpful. So, for example, if we think of the prepositions that we started with, ace means going into. So you've got that circle in the center, and you can see that the arrow from ace goes into the circle. N sits in the circle, and then in fact you can see ek or x coming out of the circle, the green arrow on the right. Whereas pros goes towards the circle but doesn't go in. That's the difference. So es goes into the circle, pros goes towards. And in fact, the same for apo, it comes away from, but it's not actually coming out of, it's just coming away from. But you've got all the other prepositions there. Look at the meaning, see how this graphical presentation sort of makes sense. But don't worry too much about it now. I have made a PDF available, and you will find it on my website, and there it is. It's in www.lfcconsulting.com. You click on Learn New Testament Greek and then Resources, and then you'll get a whole list of stuff. Hopefully you've already seen some of this and been there, because there are resources from earlier videos, but there's one there for prepositions presented graphically. So there you have it, halfway through the chapter. Do the exercise, see how you get on. And I'll see you in the next video.